reheating cooked food.
Okay.
Is it permissible that we do? Did we do that? I can't remember. Let me say it anyway. Okay. Reheating cooked food. Is there any permissible way to reheat cold cooked food on Shabbos? And the answer is, or the discussion, reheating cooked food on Shabbos can involve two different prohibitions. The first is the rabbinic edict against placing cold cooked food on a heat source, even one which is covered by a blech, which applies to all foods, dry or liquid. The second one, which applies only to cold liquids, is a possible transgression of the actual labor of cooking, since a cold liquid, even if it has already been cooked, may not be reheated. The practical halacha is thus as follows. It is forbidden to place cold foods, dry or liquid, cooked or uncooked, directly on a fire or anywhere on a blech where the food could possibly reach the temperature of Yad Soledet Bo, which is approximately 110 degrees Fahrenheit. But it is permitted, according to many poskim, to place any cold food on the edge of the blech, far enough from the flame to ensure that the food will never reach the temperature of Yad Soledet Bo. Other poskim do not permit doing so, even for cooked dry foods. It is permitted to place dry, cold meat, chicken, or kugel on top of a pot of soup or cholent, which is on the fire or in a crock pot, even if the heat source is not covered, or directly on top of a radiator, even if the food will become piping hot. Some poskim hold that it is also permitted to place such food on the lid of an empty pot or an empty overturned pan placed over the fire, but only if the heat source is properly covered. Others forbid using an empty pot or pan altogether. It is permitted to place cooked, dry foods or warm liquids such as soup or gravy near a heat source, covered or uncovered, even if the foods will reach the temperature of Yad Soledet Bo. However, it is only permitted to place cold cooked liquids or any uncooked food near any heat source if the food will never reach the temperature of Yad Soledet Bo. And finally, whenever food is reheated on Shabbos, the food items should not be completely wrapped and sealed in aluminium foil. Instead, the edge of the foil should be left slightly apart to avoid the prohibition of hatzmana. Okay. So.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks,
I hope
Kevin.
that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I hope your share provides, and my share provides refuah for the chulim of Klal Yisrael and the safety of Klal Yisrael
Amen.
against
Amen.
terrorism and other risky practices. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to do, I've timed it, a few-minute summary of last time, unless you guys just know it off by heart. So I've looked at my watch. I'm aware of the time. And then what we're going to do after this, when are you writing to your client? Now. Okay. All right. So guys, I'm just going to share my screen with you 1 second again in terms of the Mishnah. If Gavin, you just want to read from the top, if the fact.
Let me just turn this. Sorry, I'm on a phone. Let me just turn it sideways. Give me a second. Okay. If the fact that one stole an ox or a sheep was established by the testimony of two witnesses, and the fact that he then slaughtered or sold the stolen animal was established by their testimony as well, or by the testimony of two other witnesses, he pays a fourfold or fivefold payment. The Mishnah continues. If one stole...
Perfect.
Oh, that's
perfect.
it.
That's okay. So that's the summary that we're just going to deal with very, very quickly. Okay. So if you remember there, the Gemara addresses the Mishnah's ruling that if two witnesses testify to the theft and two other witnesses testify to the sale and slaughter, either the sale or the slaughter, the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So, guys, let's say that our Mishnah does not accord with Rabbi Akiva. Because if you say that it does accord with Rabbi Akiva, you must remember that Rabbi Akiva says, when the Torah says that witnesses shall establish a matter, it implies but not half a matter. So where do we get this from? Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15, where it states, according to two witnesses, etc., shall a matter be established. Okay? And that, in other words, that is, the testimony is unacceptable unless it establishes a complete matter. So what do you mean unacceptable? That Rabbi Akiva maintains that testimony, which is relevant only in conjunction with the testimony of other witnesses, isn't valid at all. So he's saying that if you need more than one set of witnesses, it has to be the same witness, group of two witnesses. Otherwise, it's not valid. Okay? For it was taught in a brisa when Father Chalafta went to Rav Yochanan ben Nuri to study Torah, or as others reported, when Rav Yochanan ben Nuri went to Father Chalafta to study Torah, he said to them, and this, guys, if you remember, was from Bava Basra, the 28th daf in Aleph. We're dealing about a case in that Mishnah where if witnesses testify that a person occupies a property to have belonged previously to another person, okay, for 3 years. So this new person occupies a property for 3 years, and the original owner did not contest his occupancy during that entire period. The occupant establishes a presumption of title known as a chazakah, which means he's now the owner of the property, and the occupant. Sorry, guys. That's why I don't wear a tie usually. It's only on Shabbos. That's why the occupant can claim that he purchased the field or the apartment or whatever, even though he can't produce a deed of sale or witnesses attesting to the sale. Because we learned, obviously, that a person is not expected to keep deeds for longer than 3 years. And if you're using witnesses, they might be not around. They might be in a different town. So about 3 years was the maximum that you were required to keep documentation. Again, it's different today because, as we said last time in the shir, because you can upload documents and legal cases can go back more than 3 years. Okay, so what was this discussion about? So, guys, suppose an occupant used a property for 3 years, right? So the first year before 2 witnesses. So, in other words, across the apartments in Israel and Renana, Arthur moves in and he sees the same husband and wife, and the husband's got a brother that visits him, and they've seen Arthur and his family there for that first year. Then they move out, and there's a different group of people, and they provide another 2 witnesses for the second year that Arthur is staying in that apartment in Renana. Okay? And then the third year, there's another 2 set of witnesses. What is the law? In other words, can the 3 separate testimonies of 2 witnesses each testifying for a year of occupancy, be combined to establish a chazakah or not? So he replied to them, this is a chazakah as the testimonies can be combined. That's according to the rabbis. I too say so. He said, but Rabbi Akiva differs in this matter. For Rabbi Akiva is one to say, when the Torah says that witnesses shall establish the matter, it implies but not half a matter. Okay? Now, the issue is then, obviously, if we're dealing with our issue. So the testimony is unacceptable to Rabbi Akiva unless it establishes a complete matter. So accordingly, since none of the 3 sets of witnesses on their own can establish the chazakah, their testimony, according to Rabbi Akiva, is unacceptable. According to the rabbis, it's acceptable. Now, guys, look, in the case of our Mishnah, there are 2 testimonies that are necessary for the 4-5-fold penalty to apply. Okay, fair enough.
And I'm wearing glasses to magnify.
Okay.
Okay, should we start again before you interrupt me one more time? If the fact of one who stole an ox or a sheep was established by the testimony of 2 witnesses, and the fact that he then slaughtered and sold the stolen animal was established by their testimony as well, or by the testimony of 2 other witnesses, he pays a 4-fold or 5-fold payment.
Perfect. So what is our Mishnah dealing with? The 2 sets of witnesses testify to what, Arth?
Whether they slaughtered or sold it.
No, the first set of witnesses are there to establish that a theft took place. That's number one.
Okay.
It's unlikely that the same set of witnesses are going to be available when the animal happens to be sold or slaughtered. That's a fact. So the rabbis in this case don't have a problem with it because they say it's statistically unlikely. So they would conclude
Okay.
that two separate sets of witnesses are fine. But it seems to be posing here that Rabbi Akiva would have a problem with it because there are two separate sets of witnesses, and that is a case where generally he says they don't complete a matter if they're two different sets of witnesses. So we're saying that our Mishnah would Rabbi Akiva have a problem with it. Okay? And what was the answer last time? Arth?
I have no idea. I can't remember that far back.
Okay, good. That's what we do in Chazorah. So before you guys feel that we're dragging off at Chazorah, one's got to know the Chazorah before going on. So, has Kevin got a thought on the issue? Do we say that our Mishnah is going to have a problem with Rabbi Akiva or not? And what is the reason?
The reason?
Yes, in other words, does Rabbi Akiva, is he going to have a problem with our Mishnah, and what was the reason given?
If there's another set of witnesses that testify to the slaughter or sale.
So, correct, that's correct. So what do you think that Rabbi Akiva, firstly, Kevin, let me ask you on face value, do you think Rabbi Akiva would have a problem with our Mishnah?
No.
Why not?
I'm just guessing. I don't, you see, I don't know what, I can't absorb what Rabbi Akiva's theory is. That's the thing.
Criticizing you, and I'm not
criticizing No, not at all. I just can't do it. It's just difficult for me.
I'm not criticizing you, Arthur, or Gavin. What I'm saying,
I just try to know facts. That's my thing, and I try.
No, I can answer this. Don't drag me with this.
Okay. All right.
I'm not part of this. I know the answer, I think.
But give me the answer. Lovely. I'm happy.
So Rabbi Akiva will doesn't approve of this Mishnah, and the reason why is because he's saying that because it's one issue, it has to be the same witnesses. You can't separate it.
Very good. So on first glance, it would appear that Rabbi Akiva has a problem with it because it's stating that there was a first group of witnesses that viewed the theft, that observed the theft, and it was a second group of witnesses that saw the animal being slaughtered or stolen. So according to, at first glance, it would seem that Rabbi Akiva would definitely have a problem with this because when there are two different sets of witnesses, he said that doesn't complete a matter. Those are two halves to a matter. So that's correct. So that does make sense. Now I'm going to ask you, Gavin, what was the next part of the Gemara discussion? Is it in fact that case? And if it is that case, why? And if it's not that case, why?
So no, I don't remember. It's from no, I don't. But I know that we did resolve it, and that Rabbi Akiva would actually be okay with it. But I can't remember.
Okay, that's fine. So let's just determine the reason. I'm just going through it very quickly. Is that a buyer said? Rav Abaye said, you can even say that the Mishnah actually does accord with Rabbi Akiva, because does not Rabbi Akiva concede where two witnesses testify that a man betrothed a woman and two other witnesses testify that another man cohabited with her, and she is therefore liable to the death penalty for committing adultery, that although the witnesses to the cohabitation require the testimony of the witnesses to the betrothal, in order for their testimony to be effective, since the witnesses to the betrothal do not require the testimony of the witnesses to the cohabitation for their testimony to be effective, we call it, even their second testimony, a complete matter. So what we are saying is that even in this case, Abaye says, Rabbi Akiva says you can have two different sets of witnesses. Because the first set of witnesses, if you have an adultery case, it's one case. You have to actually prove that the woman was married. So obviously, the people that happen to in the next town view the woman as having an. Just mute you off. that the woman is, they viewed in the next time. They were basically, say the two witnesses were playing poker in a barn or whatever the case may be, and this couple went in and they had relations, and they actually saw this couple have relations. The whole reason the couple went into the next time is not to get caught, right, guys? They didn't want to get caught. There's a saying that you never poop on your own doorstep. Meaning, if you're going to commit something illicit, you try not to get caught and you go in a different town. So it'll be a different group of witnesses that view the adultery aspect. But before it's known as adultery, where she could get the death penalty, it has to be established she's married. So Rabbi Akiva, even in this case, Abaye said, would accept the testimony of another two witnesses that were at her chuppah 15 years before, and said, yes, they were witnesses in terms of the ketubah, and she did get married to this other fellow. And once that is established that she's married, only then the adultery is valid. So in other words, in order to convict on adultery with those witnesses, you need the betrothal witnesses first. It's dependent upon her being betrothed in order to get the death penalty. So even though there are two sets of witnesses here, this is a case that Rabbi Akiva would agree. You need it. It's not going to be the same group of witnesses. Very unlikely, guys. So even in this case, Rabbi Akiva would agree. He doesn't agree in the case of a chazaka because he said three independent sets of witnesses, each testifying to a year of occupancy, can't be combined to achieve a single case. But this is a case of complete testimony. See, the case of the occupancy where you've got three sets of witnesses is not a complete testimony on its own. But Rabbi Akiva says in this case it's a complete testimony because, again, Kevin, you've got two witnesses testifying that she got married 15 years before because they were witnesses at the ketubah of the wedding. Now you've got a separate set of two witnesses that 15 years later that saw her have, while she was still married, adultery in the next town. And then the witnesses in regards to the marriage had to establish that she was married. So those are complete witnesses, one testifying to her betrothal and a separate set of witnesses testifying to the adultery. So they were complete witnesses within each separate matter. And the adultery witnesses were dependent upon the betrothal witnesses. So it's a complete matter. It's different to a case of occupancy where alone the testimony of the three sets of witnesses do not prove anything. Only combined do they prove occupancy for 3 years and therefore chazaka, that if the original owner didn't complain in 3 years, there's obviously an arrangement where if you have a place for 3 years, you've considered to own it, unless the landlord made a declaration saying this person is renting for 3 years, or made some sort of official declaration. Okay, so they're two separate cases. So Abaye is saying in our case it's the same. It's very unlikely that the witnesses that view the thievery are the same witnesses that are gonna stick around to witness the slaughter or sale of the animal. And therefore, they both complete sets of witnesses testifying to two things. Again, there's no 4 or 5-fold payment for the slaughter or sale if you're slaughtering or selling your own animal. So the first set of witnesses establishes there's a theft. That's a complete matter. Even according to Abaye, Rabbi Akiva would see it that. And the second one is a complete matter in terms of the slaughter or sale of the animal that was stolen, which is dependent on the first set of witnesses testifying to the theft. So they're witnesses in their own subject matters being a complete matter. Yes, the second set of witnesses need the first set. Just in the case of adultery, you have to prove this in marriage. In order to say there's a 4 or 5-fold payment for slaughter, so yes, there has to be a set of witnesses that testify to the theft. But in and of itself, the witnesses complete the matter. So it's different in the case of chazaka, where independently the two sets of witnesses for the respective years don't complete the matter at all to Rabbi Akiva. The rabbis say you obviously you can use the 3 sets of witnesses in combination to provide a case, but Rabbi Akiva says no, because separately you've got nothing. Together you've got something. Whereas in this case, separately you've got something. You've got proof of theft, or you've got proof of a marriage. Does that make sense? So in other words, the second testimony of the proof of adultery, you need a proof of marriage. And in our case of a Mishnah, before you say there's a 4 or 5-fold payment for sale or slaughter, you have to prove there's a theft. So they're complete matters in and of itself in terms of witnesses. So Rabbi Akiva wouldn't have a problem with this, according to a buyer. But then comes back the question that's saying, well, then obviously the rabbis need to do something with that verse in Deuteronomy. Okay? Because why was that verse in Deuteronomy there to start with? Does that make sense, guys? In Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15. Because they have to do something with that verse, according to 2 witnesses, etc., shall a matter be established. So it's saying, what's a case in which the rabbis say that you need completed testimony, and it's not sufficient to have a combination of testimonies, like in the case of the chazaka for the 3-year property? Okay. So, guys, do you want me to tell you? Do you remember offhand the exact case? Guys?
Tell us.
All right. So the Gemara asks from the rabbis, this exposition of a matter but not half a matter, what manner of incomplete testimony does it come to exclude? It comes to exclude the case in which 2 witnesses testify to establish the adult status of a girl. So what we're saying is, all right, guys, there are more than one ways to get a death penalty. The one is from adultery. The other one is for adultery, but the condition is the woman has to be a woman in order to commit adultery, even if she's legally married. If she's not of a certain level of sexual or age development, it doesn't count as adultery. So the criteria is twofold. So the legal ramifications establish her adulthood, and that means that she's liable to punishment by the courts for any transgression she might commit. And in the event that somebody betroths her, she will be considered a married woman, according to Rashi. So attaining adulthood is the critical factor, guys, in being able to enter into a biblically recognized marriage. Only in the case of a girl who has no father. Because we said a girl who is under a father's jurisdiction, she cannot legally effect her own betrothal, even upon becoming an adult, until she becomes a bechores. So that's in Kedushin in the 43rd daf. But a father can even betroth this girl to somebody before she attains adulthood. So again, if she has a father, it's a legally biblical marriage. And in that case, it doesn't matter about sexual maturity. And even she doesn't have her own rights, even if she's sexually mature, she has a father. He has to marry her off. She needs his permission. Okay? Now we're saying this is a girl that has no father. So what that basically means is she can only enter into a biblically acceptable relationship if she's 12 years of age, okay, and she has 2 pubic hairs. Okay, not that it's not a marriage, but it's not considered a sexually adult or active marriage in the sense that she'd be liable and tried as an adult. Because remember, guys, in secular law, you tried as a juvenile if you're under 18 for homicide. There are restrictions because your mental capacity hasn't developed the full level of responsibility yet in secular law. So to here, if she's not yet 12 and hasn't developed 2 pubic hairs, she's not considered a sexual adult capable of committing adultery. Okay. So, listen, the Gemara in Nida in 52b states that the 2 pubic hairs need not be close together. And some opinions say it is. But look, the bottom line is as follows. So the rabbis say in this particular case, when you're dealing with life and death, we don't want to put this woman into the death penalty, so we've got to be very strict. Kevin, I just need a few minutes and we're done. I can hear you sighing and you're feeling a bit frustrated.
I'm tired. No, I'm just tired. Because it's. But just before you continue, so if the woman had a sexual encounter with a married man, so what is that? Just is she considered someone unmarried, basically?
A single
what is that
woman,
then?
A single woman can have a doesn't get the death penalty for sleeping with a married man, because a married man in Jewish law can have
She
more
may
than
be
one
married.
wife.
But she's not
No. Let me just explain this to you. No single woman can get the death penalty for sleeping with a married man, because
Correct.
her claim is he was going to make an honest woman of me. He promised me marriage. He can marry more than one woman. He didn't follow through. He has commitment issues. Where's my ring? What do you mean the death penalty? You must marry me. So there's no death penalty for her. We're talking about a woman that's married, single woman that doesn't have a father that's biblically married. If she is a juvenile sexually and age-wise, she doesn't get the death penalty for adultery, even if she's biblically married, because she has to be sexually mature enough to commit adultery. 12 years of age, 2 pubic hairs. Okay, so we're saying a woman that has no father, because if she has a father, even if she's underage, it's considered a biblical marriage, effectual biblical marriage. Therefore, it's still a problem. Okay, so a married girl, this is a married girl without a father. But do we try her as an adult, or do we try her as a juvenile? If she's tried as an adult, she gets the death penalty. If she's tried as a juvenile, she does not. So this is a girl that's 12 years of age. So there's one witness that says, Kevin, I observed one hair on her back, and one separate witness says, I observed one hair on her abdomen. It's a euphemism. It doesn't mean on her tummy and her back. It means in her vaginal area in the front, there's one pubic hair that's witnessed by one witness, and one towards the rear end, either anal area or vaginal pelvic area from the back, a separate pubic hair is viewed by a separate witness, obviously a female witness to examine her. So the Gemara rejects the answer, saying we don't need this exposition, a matter but not half a matter, to exclude this case. For such testimony is not only half a matter, it's also half the necessary testimony, for we only have one witness testifying to the presence of each hair. So what that's saying is, in this case, even the testimony to half a matter, to one pubic hair, would be acceptable. The testimony would also be invalid, because there's only one witness to each hair, and 2 witnesses are necessary to establish the fact. So in other words, if there are 2 witnesses viewing her from the front, this is the case that we're dealing with. They have to see 2 pubic hairs. Or if there are 2 witnesses viewing her from the back, they have to see 2 pubic hairs from the rear and the pelvis area. Okay? So what we're saying is, it's obviously not a case where there's a single witness on each side of her, because their testimony means nothing. Those are 2 separate witnesses. You don't put them together. You don't put them together at all. It has to be 2 witnesses viewing the same thing. So what we're saying is, rather, according to the rabbis, the exposition of Matabin comes to exclude a case in which 2 witnesses says, we observed one hair on her back, and 2 other witnesses that say we observe one hair on her abdomen. Okay? So what it's saying is, there are 2 witnesses testifying to each pubic hair, and their testimony would be valid if not for the exposition of a matter, but not a half a matter. Okay? So these, the set who testify to observing one hair on her back, say that she's a minor, and these, the set who testify to observing one hair on her abdomen, say that she's a minor. So what we are saying is, if the woman's standing on her side, you can't, in certain positions, see a minor pubic hair on the one side and another pubic hair. It's not within your peripheral vision. So the witnesses, if it's not within the peripheral vision, are you with me? Sure. If it's not within their peripheral vision, there's a problem even if they're 2. So they're saying if there are 2 witnesses, female witnesses observing her from the rear, and they pick up one pubic hair on the rear, and they go around in the front, even a different set of witnesses, and view it in the front, they're in 2 different distinct periods of time, and that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable, because unless it can be viewed at one juncture, the 2 witnesses have not seen the same thing, because 2 sets of witnesses have only seen one pubic hair in one time juncture. So even if you've got another set that's looking at the front, and even in the one in the rear, they're 2 separate sets of witnesses, If you say, well, why don't we just take the same two witnesses that viewed a rear to come in the front? They're two different junctions in time. So therefore, they can't. A witness means to say that you see two pubic hairs simultaneously in order that she's known as an adult. If two witnesses only both view a single pubic hair in one period of time, she is tried as a minor and therefore doesn't get the death penalty. So this is what the rabbis enacted in order to protect her. So they basically have to view the same thing.
Standing in the same position, the two witnesses.
In other words, even on the side, if they manage to on the side view see both, then that's acceptable.
Then the one can show the other.
No, a set of witnesses.
They both have to see the both pubic hairs simultaneously.
No, that's not it. Guys, okay, let me just explain it to you like this. If you've got two sets of witnesses, those two witnesses you have to see two pubic hairs. If they see one, they can't call out to the other and say, what do you see?
Ah, yeah.
They can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if they go around and you say, why don't you just get the same witnesses? They view it from the rear, they see it, make a note, and they view it from the front. It's not simultaneous noticing of two pubic hairs. Therefore, it's invalid. It's two different time junctures. They've got to see in the woman enough sexual development that there's two pubic hairs within one viewing.
Yes.
And therefore, she's tried as a minor, because individual pubic hairs means she's a minor. Two or more means she's an adult, and tried as an adult, providing she's 12.
Okay, so if she's
what the rabbis say is the case that is talking about in this pasuk in Deuteronomy. Yeah.
So then, if she's a minor, and let's say she had sexual relations with the guy, but she happened to be married, but biblically, but not as an adult, then what happens to her? Is it considered as if she was like a single person?
It's considered that she's not sexually mature enough to have committed adultery.
So then, can she still remain married to the guy she married?
I honestly have no idea.
That's an interesting question.
That's a great question. I honestly have no idea. I mean, the relevance here is just what do the rabbis do? In what case would they agree with Rabbi Akiva? And this is the classical case.
Because she's not considered sexually mature or an adult, basically.
No, it's
she doesn't have the two pubic hairs.
Because the whole thing is the set of witnesses, two separate sets of witnesses, one testing to a frontal view and a rear view, can't be combined to try as an adult. That's what we're saying. It's not a complete matter. A set of witnesses have to see from the same view at the same time junction the two pubic hairs to judge her as an adult. Guys, I'm sorry about this chazorah, but it was needed.
No, it was good. I knew that. Yeah, I knew that we did it last time and we discussed it about the two pubic hairs. But it's always good to reinforce it.
Listen, I'm happy to go. From now on, I'm going to go into new stuff. I'm ready with new stuff.